What we should not do, and this is a nice segue into our second topic, is entertain anything ghostly and spiritual, try to invite those things in a way that is unholy. And what by that I mean, there are, if imagine like the supernatural world, which is all around us, right? And in some respects within us too. There are portals to this world, and those portals can be how we act, the decisions we make, the sins we might commit, but also the virtues and the graces that we act upon, which help us to engage with the spiritual life, right? In the former examples, in terms of the bad decisions and the vices and the sins, and also in occult, anytime we play around with the occult, in the Old Testament, one of the biggest sins, right up there with murder, is the idea of divination, trying to get control of one's destiny through magical means, any means other than God. So, and we see that with our first parents, Adam and Eve.
Right.
So at any rate, those kinds of things are these negative portals to a lot of negative consequences engaging with the spiritual world. But there are also positive portals as well of engagement, and that's our prayer, right? That's our devotional life, it's sacraments. And so we want to surround ourselves with those positive access points and engage with God that way. And that's what he's given us, because like Paul says, and it's one of my favorite verses because it keeps me grounded in the fact that there's more out there than what I just see and taste and feel and smell and touch. There's more going on. We say it in the creed every Sunday, creator of all things visible and invisible. And Paul tells us, look, we're in the midst of, as a human race, we're in the midst of a battle between good and evil. And the players on the battlefield, most of them, we can't even see. So the recommendation is to surround yourself with the truth of the gospel, the truth of God's love for you. Surround yourself with the grace of the sacraments. Reconciliation is one of the most powerful sacraments in terms of spiritual warfare. I know we're going to talk about this a little bit in more depth in just a moment when we talk about deliverance ministry, a part of which is exorcism. But reconciliation this sounds a little strange, but is more powerful, if you will, than an exorcism is. Why? Because it engages the person's will to be able to say to God, to turn back and say, I'm sorry, and to open that door to receive his forgiveness and to receive that grace that begins to change us back or change us once again and more into his image and likeness. Somebody who is possessed can't do anything for themselves. They can't control their will. Their will is being controlled. So that we'll talk about that in just a moment. But reconciliation, and not just for spiritual warfare, but certainly anytime you're in serious sin, please take advantage of that sacrament. I know we've got our group here that's on with us, but I'm just speaking out to the YouTube world, to the Facebook world. Take advantage of that sacrament, that opportunity to come back to God. It is so powerful.
Amen. We want to mention that Letty, it looks like Letty Antiveros is watching. So thanks for joining us today.
Hi, Letty.
As we talk about angels and demons and feast days, oh my. So we're, acting a little silly here, at least I am. And
this is normal. This is normal for me, Steve.
That's normal for him, but for him. Which one's the angel and which one's the demon? I don't know.
Wolf in sheep's clothing. I even said wolf in sheep's clothing and you hit the button. That was fantastic.
That was perfect, right?
All right. So let's talk a little bit more about, I keep alluding to it and now we're getting to it. Let's talk about an important ministry in the Catholic Church, which today we often speak of as deliverance ministry. So in every diocese around the world, you have an exorcist, a priest who's appointed to help those who can no longer help themselves, who are plagued by the supernatural world in terms of some sort of demonic activity. Could be, infestation. Steve alluded to a house where a lot of weird things were happening. Could be oppression, where a person is still in control of their will, but their life is just being bombarded with all sorts of spiritual attacks. And it can manifest in terms of kind of crazy psychological and emotional behavior, and sometimes self-violent or violence to others. We call that oppression. And then finally, a full-blown possession, where a person's no longer in control of themselves. The demon is in control. So I want to say something first and foremost. When we talk about deliverance ministry, exorcism is a part of it, but it's such a rare thing. And I don't think, we do have movies and Hollywood has popularized it in terms of, I go back to The Exorcist, right, from the 70s, which was like a watershed sort of moment in pop culture. And it's still funny, Steve, that like if you go and check out on the website today, because we're in the Halloween season and everyone's doing their top 10s, top 20s of scariest films, Exorcist is still up at the top or near the top. And here's my question to you and to our audience. Why do you think that is? Why do you think that is? That movie's 50 years old. Do you have any guesses or thoughts on that?
No. Why is
So
that?
so my opinion is it stays at the top. I mean, if you look at it from like a production value, it looks kind of cheesy compared to what we have today, right? With all of our computer and graphic technology that we have and everything, just digitalizing everything. So it looks a little hokey. But here's why I think it still stays at the top of these horror movie lists. It's because it deals with a real thing. It Hollywoodizes it. It takes a real story about a child's possession, but then it, you know, does its Hollywood spin on it. But it's a real thing. And I think when people know, there's something in us that knows this is real. And then you're seeing something horrible, and in the back of your mind, you know, this is real. Versus like watching something on, you know, about vampires or werewolves or whatever, you know, that's not real. And so it seems less frightening, no matter how many jump scares they include in the film. But that's always been my thought on this, is that because people know this is a religious reality that exists in their culture, I think it makes it more frightening. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I guess I would agree with that. I think that's an important insight, that, you know, to recognize that we know the difference between real and not real in the way of vampires and zombies and things like that. But this idea that someone could be demonically possessed, like we understand the reality of that, at least the possibility of that being real,
Right.
whether
There's a
we're not really
possibility.
sure, right?
Right. So when we talk about deliverance ministry, exorcism is just a part of that. So what else happens in that? Well, there's opportunities for reconciliation. Again, that's one of the most powerful sacraments, period, but also in terms of spiritual warfare and just in terms of getting right with God, which helps us to combat those demonic influences in our lives. When we're right or righteous with God, we wear that armor of Christ that Paul talks about. So that having said that, I just want to tell a story about being involved in deliverance ministry. So this story took place, I don't know, more than 10 years ago, probably, I guess it'd be about 12 years ago now. So when I was studying at Franciscan University in Steubenville, I had a friend whose mother, she was on Coumadin, which is a blood thinner. She fell down the steps at the house while I was over there. My friend didn't have a license, so I said, I'll take the mother to the hospital. I take her to the hospital, to the emergency room. And we'll just call her Becky. Becky says, as I'm helping her fill out her paperwork, you know, getting her signed in, she just kind of leans over and casually says, "Hey, did I ever tell you that I had an exorcism performed on me?" And I said, "No, I would have remembered something like that." And she goes, "Oh yeah." And she proceeds to tell me, like, why is this happening now at this time? You know, is it the Coumadin messing with her? Like, why is she revealing all this stuff right now? I mean, I knew her, but I only knew her through her daughter. So it was crazy that she was being this vulnerable. But perhaps this was all part of God's plan, as you'll see in just a moment. So she says, yeah, a long time ago, her and her husband participated in this satanic cult. Yes, a satanic cult. And come on, Deacon Matt, those things don't exist. They do. We just don't talk about them as much as we used to. And she was describing the activity of the cult and so forth. So we get Becky into the triage area and get her hooked up to an IV and so forth. And she falls asleep. Now, here's the spiritual warfare part. And believe me, I don't always pray the rosary, but I was really motivated to pray the rosary after hearing Becky's story. So I grab it, we're praying the rosary. Becky's sleeping. They bring this person in to the ER who's just like screaming their head off because they're missing like part of their arm. And they're like obviously going to be rushing this person into surgery or whatever. And it wakes Becky up. And she gets all upset and she starts to get like really agitated. And I said, it's okay. You know, this person's going into surgery, you know, this is what happened, blah, blah, blah. And she goes, no, you don't understand. The devil's trying to get me. Now, if she had just said something like that without all the pretext of the story, like I've had an exorcism performed on me before, I used to be in a satanic cult, I would have been like, what are you talking about? But because of all that, I was like, really? And she's like, yes, I got to get out of here. So she gets out of bed. She pulls the IV out of her arm. She's trying to change her clothes. And I tell her she can't leave because the doctor hasn't seen her yet. and she's still trying to get out of there. And I keep insisting that she stop and get back in bed. And then she finally turns around, and her eyes go all white, and her voice goes way down, like to a bass. And she tells me, and I can't use these expletives on Catechist stream, but to get out of her way. And then she just proceeds to bolt past me, knocking me over, runs down the hall in the emergency room, takes a left around this corner. I go after her. The nurses at the nursing station are like calling the orderlies, and all this commotion now and everything. As I chase Becky around the corner, I come across another surprising sight. And it's like a 5 foot tall nun in this black habit, and she's holding Becky, like hugging Becky, and Becky's sobbing on this nun's shoulder. And I'm like, what is going on? And this nun gets Becky calmed down and sets her on a bench. And then the nun comes over to me, and just like in an instant, she's assessed this entire situation, and just kind of shows up out of nowhere. And the nun grabs my hands, and you can tell she looks very old, these very deep inset lines in her face, but very beautiful, kind of youthful eyes. And she holds my hands, and she says to me, she'll be okay, referring to Becky. She'll be okay. She'll be okay. Sometimes the devil just tries to scare us. And then the nun just turns around, walks down the hall, the other way, past Becky, and leaves. Now around behind me come the nurses and the orderlies, and they're trying to get Becky back in her bed. And I go walking back with all of them, and the nurse says, or I say to the nurse, you won't believe this, but there was a nun here who got Becky calmed down, and then she talked to me, and it was like, I was trying to figure out, who is this person? What's her name? And the nurse is like, are you sure it was a nun? I'm like, I know what a nun looks like. She's in a black habit, has her big old rosaries hanging down here. I know what a nun looks like. She goes, well, you're talking about the TOR sisters, the Third Order Regular Franciscan sisters. Well, they haven't been in this hospital for 50 years. Boom. Like that was an unbelievable, I didn't know what to call that. I was astonished. I didn't have words for how I felt when I heard that. So then he makes me think, in the span of a few minutes, perhaps I was witness to something very demonic and also very angelic. Because who is this nun that just shows up, takes care of everything in a matter of a few moments, and is gone, and then nobody knows who the heck you're talking about, or says it's not possible that you're talking about these TOR sisters. So I'll never forget that. And that started my interest in spiritual warfare and deliverance ministry and so forth. And then now I help out with that ministry in the Diocese of Des Moines. I've also been present in a couple of exorcisms. Those exorcisms today do not look like what they are in the movies. What you see today in an exorcism is you'll see a priest, sometimes a deacon, sometimes a prayer team of lay people who have been appointed to be a part of deliverance ministry, who are present at these sessions to just pray for the person who needs prayer, pray for everybody involved, family members, and then physicians. You'll see a doctor, you'll see a psychologist or psychiatrist there. And it's almost like if you go to Mayo Clinic and they have like a team of doctors to assess your situation and give you the best care. That's the approach that the church takes with deliverance ministry, specifically with exorcism. So exorcism is something that just happens. You have to go through a lot of protocols, a lot of vetting, definitely engages the sciences, psychology and modern medicine, but it's been really a life-changing thing to be a part of. So that's my story. I know it was a bit long, but I just wanted to share that on this special Halloween episode.
Well, when else could you share that?
I don't know.
It's definitely mind-bending to think about the reality of what you're saying.
Yeah.
But to witness that firsthand, you have to believe it, right?
Right.
And that's what we're hearing from the scriptures. That's what we're hearing the church is that there's a reality of spirits.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes we have the opportunity to interact with them, and we want to be on the good side of things, right?
Yeah, you do. And you know what the weirdest thing was what you just said is so true. And I remember after being at my first exorcism, leaving the session, and I'm hungry. So I stop off at like an Arby's, and my typical order is a beef and cheddar. And I'm ordering the sandwich, and I'm like, how did I go from where I was and what was happening to now I'm at Arby's getting a beef and cheddar? Like, it's like two different worlds. But to your
Right.
point, those worlds are together. We just don't see it very often.